So this is a very small introduction about me. Hello everyone, this is Tuti. I have qualified in CSIR UGC NET June 2020 DBT GET JGEEBILS ACTREC examinations. Thus, we are starting with cell signaling. In this video, I am going to discuss some basic aspects of cell signaling, and from the next video we will start with GPCR. So in this slide, it is basically shown the basic aspect of cell signaling. What happens in cell signaling? There is a receptor protein which is often present on the cell membrane. They are called the cell surface receptors. Now on the plasma membrane of the cell we have the receptor. To this receptor, one specific signaling molecule binds and it activates the receptor. Now what happens, this activated receptor relays the signal to the inside of the cell through a series of intracellular signaling proteins. These intracellular signaling proteins basically relay the signal from the cell surface. They are also called intracellular mediators. Now we have the effector proteins. Effector proteins are such proteins which are affected or which are activated by the activated receptor. The receptor is getting activated and it activates the effector proteins. Now these effector proteins function in causing various changes in the cell, like they can alter cell expression, gene expression, they can alter metabolism of the cell, or they can alter the cell shape. Depending on the type of effector protein and the type of signaling molecule, we can have different changes as a result of receptor activation and effector protein activation. Thereby it alters the behavior of the cell. Now we have two types of receptors. One are cell surface receptors, another are intracellular receptors. So the cell surface receptors are present on the surface of the cell. Here this receptor molecule faces the outside of the cell. We know the outside of the cell is hydrophilic and the plasma membrane has hydrophobic nature. Thus here the signaling molecule binds to the receptor present on the surface of the cell. Thus the signaling molecule can be hydrophilic as they are binding from the outside. They don't need to cross the plasma membrane. Thus here the signaling molecules are hydrophilic. On the other hand, if we look into intracellular receptors, these intracellular receptors are present inside the cell. So the signaling molecules which will bind to these intracellular receptors need to move inside the cell, or in other words they need to cross the plasma membrane. Now we know this plasma membrane is hydrophobic in nature. Thus if these signaling molecules are hydrophilic, they would not be able to cross the hydrophobic plasma membrane, right? So here the signaling molecules are hydrophobic. Again another thing, the outside of the cell is hydrophilic. So how can this hydrophobic signaling molecule reach till the surface of the cell? There the function of carrier protein comes. Carrier protein is such a protein which binds to the signaling molecule and guides the signaling molecule till the surface of the cell. Rather, it shields the signaling molecule from the outside hydrophilic environment. The signaling molecule is hydrophobic and it is shielded from the outside hydrophilic environment and carried till the surface of the cell. After that, the hydrophobic signal molecule diffuses into the interior of the cell. So here we can see there are two types of receptors, cell surface receptors and intracellular receptor, and the basic mechanism of the functioning of two types of receptors we have seen. Now we have four types of intercellular signaling. There are four types of intercellular signaling. If we look into the first one, it is called contact dependent. Contact dependent means we have a signaling cell and a target cell. Target cell is the type of cell which expresses the receptor, and the signaling cell gives the signal. From the term we can understand. Here what happens, the signaling cell which is giving the signal and the target cell having the receptor specific for that signal, they are in direct contact. Thus it is called the contact dependent form of signaling. The second type is paracrine. Paracrine signaling means the signaling cell and the target cell are neighbors. They are not in close contact, but they are also not far apart. They are neighbors. Here what happens, the signaling cell gives out the signal and this signal gets relayed through local mediators or intracellular mediators or intracellular signaling molecules to the target cell. The target cell has the receptor specific for this signal. Now we come to long distance signaling. There are two types. One is synaptic signaling, another is endocrine signaling. Synaptic signaling, from the term we can understand, it is synapse or conduction through the nerve cell. Here what happens, the target cell releases signaling molecule. The signaling molecule that we talk about here are called neurotransmitters. Now these neurotransmitters get translocated along the neuron towards the cell body through axon. Now this target cell is releasing neurotransmitter at synapse and the neurotransmitters get translocated through axon to the cell body along the nerve cell. This is called a long distance transport. Another type of long distance transport we know is endocrine signaling. Endocrine, as we know, as we understand from the term, it is a hormone. Here the signaling molecules are hormones. Now these hormones are released from endocrine cell and they get translocated through the body fluid, through the blood vessel to the distant target cell where there are specific receptors present. So in this slide we have seen the 4 types of intercellular signaling. Now we have 3 types of cell surface receptors. Cell surface receptor means present on the cell surface, present on the plasma membrane. The first type of cell surface receptor is ion channel coupled receptors. They are also called ionotropic receptors. Here what happens, the binding of signal molecule to the receptor closes the receptor channel and ions are conducted. This type of receptors we will see in the later sections. They are present in the electrically excitable tissues like nerve cells, muscle cells. Here the opening of the channel causes conduction of ions. Thus they are called ionotropic receptors. The second type of receptor that we will see in detail in later videos, they are called GPCR or G protein coupled receptors. G protein coupled receptor are the largest class of cell surface receptor. G protein coupled receptor is a serpentine receptor. Crosses the membrane 7 times, thus it is called serpentine. Here what happens, this type of receptors are coupled to a protein called G protein. G protein is the type of protein which can exist in 2 forms. One is GTP bound, another is GDP bound. When it is bound to GTP, the G protein is active. It can conduct the signal. And when it is bound to GDP, it is in its inactive form. Thus, when signaling molecule binds to the GPCR, the G protein gets bound to GTP and the signal is relayed. This type of signaling mechanism or signaling receptor is called GPCR. We will see in detail later. Okay. So the third type of receptor that also we will see in detail if possible, they are called the enzyme coupled receptor. Here what happens, the receptor itself has enzymatic activity or they are coupled to any enzyme. The famous example to this type of receptor is receptor tyrosine kinase. Here the receptor has tyrosine kinase or kinase activity. It can phosphorylate itself on tyrosine residues. Here the binding of signaling molecule to the receptor enhances the enzymatic activity of the receptor, or they are coupled to another enzyme whose enzymatic activity is enhanced on binding of signaling molecule to the receptor. So they are called enzyme coupled receptor. Thus, as far we have seen the basic aspects of cell signaling along with some basic introductions, right? So from the later videos we will start with GPCR. I will try to cover as much as possible from this channel. Rest is all your support and cooperation. With all of your support and cooperation, I think we will be able to do, right? So I will be soon back with later videos on GPCR and then ACTREC. Till then, take care, stay safe, bye bye.